Cry, preach. Cry. Do it!
Nuts, you kept this secret?
Go, preach, go! Oh, shit! FF14 Shadowbringers. My favorite RPG story ever. And that is my arm screaming and crying at me. Why? Why would I go to Matoya's cave? What has she done for me? Also, when you say Matoya, do you mean Y'shtola? But anyway, without further ado, FF14 Shadowbringers, my favorite RPG ever. Let us enjoy.
Lord Vorthree, your reign of tyranny is at an end. For too long you have preyed upon the desperation of the poor.
What nonsense is this? Me? Unseated? No.
Oh, isn't this when his head goes 180?
Inconceivable!
Yo, that guy's got a baby on his titties. That's fucked up.
True. Yeah, 180. Go, preach, go! Oh, shit! That could have been bad.
You read the title correctly. It's not hyperbole. Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers has elevated to my #1 spot of RPG stories ever told on video games. Divinity Original Sin 2 has been dethroned, and we need to talk about
Damn,
it.
that was
I'm not going
quick.
to go into the story details. You guys know the story of Shadowbringers, but this game took me to tears multiple times. In the 30+ years that I've been gaming, I have cried one time at a video game, just one time, but Shadowbringers got me multiple times. So we're going to talk about that, and I can safely say, I would now play literally anything written by Giga Kawa. There is no doubt whatsoever. If she wrote something, I'm going to play it. I'm going to go through that story.
Oh, is
because
that the person
it
who did the
utterly
actual
incredible.
like story
And
for
where better to start with possibly the best
Shadowbringers?
villain of all time, Emmett Selk.
A vision shared of a paradise lost, preserved only in song and scripture.
Yeah, this made me cry too, right here.
Once upon a time. Yet here we find ourselves again, to look, learn, and remember. Now, do you see why we yearn for the great rejoining?
I do. Or I did.
For our world, for our people, for all creation to be made whole again. Wouldn't you wish for the same?
Crafting a villain is insanely difficult, like way harder than you think it is. It's very easy to get somebody to do some acts of unspeakable evil, and then we as the audience all know that's the bad guy and we should dislike him. But as we all know, sometimes that comes across really flat. It's like, oh, he's baddie McBad guy, or wherever it's supposed to be. A really good villain has a point, like a point that you understand, and you can see where they're coming from. That's what makes a really good villain. A spectacular villain.
Whoa. There are two categories for fantastic villains, okay? And Xenos falls underneath one of them, okay? A fantastic villain can be a villain that you understand and you can sympathize with or empathize with, that you want them, you kind of in a way want them to win, because like their goals and their reasoning and their justifications for what they're doing seem so human, and it seems like if you were in their situation, you'd be doing the same thing. Those types of villains you can connect with instantly, like Emmett Selk. That's what Emmett Selk type villain he is. Other villains, like Xenos, are a villain, but they have no evil intent in their motives. Like, they do things because they feel like it's their purpose in existence. Like, Xenos' purpose in existence was to fight the strongest people. And whatever he had to do to get to that point, that's what he had to do. And he didn't do, and it was shown really well in Stormblood, where, like, he'd go through towns and have the ability to slaughter everyone if he wanted to. But he only fought the people who really gave him a challenge. People who wanted to actually who stood up to him because he wanted to have a good fight. And anytime he ran into someone who wasn't worth killing, he let them live because they weren't worth his time. And I love that about a villain.
Has a point that you can empathize with, that you can actually feel like, I might be on this guy's side.
Yeah,
that's exactly what Emmett Selk is.
Exactly what I just said.
That character. You feel like you understand everything that he is fighting for, and in a different life, you may even be on his side. And I think this is why I would personally rate, after the thousands and thousands of video games I've played, Emmett Selk as perhaps the #1 video game villain of all time. And is truly should be seen in that light due to how he's written.
That's fair.
I was lost with him at first. He's popping up, he's puppeteering things from the shadows, he's manipulating the Emperor, but until we get to Amarok, we don't really know what his goal is, and he's got that mystery about him, but he's also got this stoic patience.
I want to clarify, too, that Emmett Selk is a great villain. I do not think Xenos is in a top 10 at all. I don't think he's this fantastically, amazingly great villain. I think he's a good villain. And I think that for the things that I want out of a story, he does what I want. He's that character that I don't have to care about. And when you play a game like Final Fantasy XIV, where every single character has like a traumatic background and some reason for you to care about them, Xenos and I can't remember his name. It's the guy that Fandaniel takes over. Xenos and that guy have like no redeemable qualities when it comes to being a human being. They don't have, and I like that because I don't want to feel sad every time I think about fighting someone. And every time I fought someone who was a villain in this story but had a good background, like Elidibus, like Emmett Selk, I didn't want to fight them in the end. I didn't want them to die. I wanted them to stay alive. And that's good to a degree, but in some ways you want the fan service and fulfillment of finishing off an arc and feeling good about it. You don't want to go away from it feeling like, oh man, like I wanted him to win, kind of.
And that all makes sense. He's everlasting. He's lived for millennia. He has calculated and manipulated catastrophes across so many worlds, decimated entire populations. And he has the patience and wisdom to see, wait, maybe I could try this thing out. And that's exactly what he does in Shadowbringers. It's like, maybe I should take a different approach this time. Because for Emmett Selk, and you really feel this, if it doesn't work, there's always the next time. There's always another time to try it again, because he's not going anywhere. And he is aiming for his goal. If it takes another 10,000 years, it doesn't matter to him.
I thought that was
the first
cool
time
too.
I was brought to tears will probably not resonate with you guys at all, but it was my arrival in Amarok. The setup and execution here was perfection, but also it kind of lies with my audience.
It was good.
So give me a little rope here to explain my situation. Bismarck was a laughingstock to me. It was the most disappointing encounter, and I'm sure that many others experienced the same in Heaven.
It's also one of the most disappointing areas in all of Heavensward. It was not a fun time. I liked meeting the buff like Owlboys, but like other than that, like the story around that area was really flat.
His redemption and the Urianger silliness leading to Amarok just filled me with joy. I was really happy after a dark time. And at the same time, I was really wondering if there was yet another underwater area like we had seen and not particularly enjoyed in Stormblood. Under the waves we go, and sure enough, it's the bottom of the sea, and there are old ruins like we'd expect. I honestly thought that was the culmination, that the Ascians used to live here. That would be the big reveal, and we'd be happy with that. But then a weird thing started to happen as the Zone story was coming to its ending. My live audience at the time began a constant wave of excitement and spamming as I was moving through what was a relatively ordinary cave. So much, in fact, it literally lagged out my stream, and I had to beg people to calm down and stop. For 6 months since I started Final Fantasy XIV, my chat, my long-term audience, and the team I work with every single day kept Amarok a secret. And you might be wondering, why the hell would that matter compared to some of the other major spoilers in Final Fantasy XIV? My favorite game franchise of all time is BioShock, not Infinite. We literally replay it every year like a tradition, and walking out of that cave and...
Wait, you don't like Infinite? I thought Infinite was great. At least gameplay. The gameplay in Infinite was top-notch. The story was okay, but man, the gameplay in Infinite was way better than any BioShock before that. And it's actually kind of laughable if you disagree with that.
Seeing Amarok for the first time, realizing that like two of the best games I've ever played were merging together, combined with the excitement of everybody who was watching and the DMs that started flying to me from my closest friends saying how much they had longed for this moment since the moment I had started playing was too much. And that would be tears number one. And look, fact is, I love video games. I love them. They mean so much to me, and the experiences we share together, that it made me so emotional for that moment. But what a revelation it was. They called it Rapture.
It does look like Rapture. It for sure does. And this music is a banger, man. The music here in Amuro is great.
Are you fucking kidding me right now?
When the Ondo spoke of a city, I did not think they meant an actual city.
All them barnacles.
They mixed in my favorite game franchise of all time.
Then we are seeing the same view.
I don't think I could be happier than right now. This is a little overwhelming with everything that's going on right now.
Cry, Preach. Cry. Do it!
Nuts, you kept this secret? After the hours and hours we've spoke of Rapture? This is a moment, isn't it? Oh my god.
Oh, little whale. I never noticed that whale before. That's so cute.
I'm actually gonna cry. Oh my god. I can't process everything that's happening. I literally can't process everything that's happening right now.
Oh, is that a
Amarok
player?
is such an amazing place. You are confronted with the memories and the past and the society that the Ascians built. And if you're Emmett Selk, how can you not want this back? How can you not feel like you need to do everything in your power to get your friends, your family, your loved ones, your cousins, your parents, your children, if you had a chance to get them back? In Amarok, you'd learn what they had to do to bring about Zodiac, and then what they had to do to bring about Hydaelyn. And you're goddamn right that if this happened to you, you would have that same impulse.
I also want to mention, I love how Emmett Selk had such reverence for Hythlodaeus. He doesn't show it really in the flashbacks in Endwalker, but he shows it right here. He had such reverence and respect for Hythlodaeus that when he recreated Amuro, he gave Hythlodaeus his own consciousness, like unintentionally, because that's how much he held him in high regard. And I love that little touch there.
And that's what makes him so great. You can see his point. He's bad, he's misguided. Yes, what came afterwards is a whole multiple worlds of life that don't need to be destroyed. But you can absolutely empathize with his position that, yes, he wants them back, just as you or I would in those scenarios. And that's what elevates him to such great heights. And I know this comes across as like, oh, wow, bad, and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, it's worth discussing. The jailer in World of Warcraft in the Shadowlands. So many people, as Shadowlands came to an end, were defending that, hey, the jailer just didn't have time. There was no way to develop that character. He only had one expansion of breathing room in order to grow as a character for us to learn about him and care about him and have a good finale. It's just not possible. And then I stand there and I go, this is what's possible. And it's so much better.
Indeed, I agree. To say it's not possible to do an expansion is laughable. I will say that, like, part of the reason why it's harder in WoW for them to do a story like this is because World of Warcraft doesn't do their story front and center. They do their story over time. Act 1, 2, and 3 is the entire expansion's life. Act 1, 2, and 3 in Final Fantasy is the launch of the expansion. And then there's post-content that leads you into the next expansion. Like what we would call pre-patches in WoW. So, to be fair, it is harder to do in WoW, only because the content is spread out along 2 years worth of content, instead of it being all lumped in together at once. They connect all the ties together, and then they connect raids and such to them too, and then they connect the story to the raids, which in turn hurts the story. It just does. The way they set up their stuff hurts the story. I think the way that Final Fantasy went about it, disconnecting the story and the raids, was a great way to go about the entire process. Notice I said harder, not impossible. Wrath of the Lich King is a really good example of a boss being developed over one expansion for people who'd never experienced Warcraft 3. And then nailing it all the way through the end. And having the Lich King pop up in one little section one by one. Just want to mention that while we're not having any dialogue here.
Remember. Remember us. Remember that we once lived.
Actually, now that I think about it, Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm, narratively, had the best connected story. If you really think about it. From the beginning of Cataclysm until the end of Cataclysm, Deathwing's presence was ever felt. Every time, every second of every day. It was there, front and center. To the point where, like, when Cataclysm first launched, Deathwing was burning you alive if you were in the wrong zone at the wrong time. Like, there was a lot of things in Cataclysm, story-wise, that went really well. Of course, it faltered at the very end, but overall, the ever-presence of the dragon was there the entire time, just like how the ever-presence of the Lich King is there the entire time through Wrath of the Lich King. It's the entire time. It's there. It's great.
I want to talk about Thancred a little bit. It's no secret, I haven't liked Thancred since A Realm Reborn. He was very stereotypical for me. He was Mr. Smooth, Mr. Cool, but always kind of a fuck-up. He was the master of espionage who didn't notice Shinryu was sitting on top of a building that he was supposedly investigating. Like, every time he popped up, he kind of turned up after the action, and...
You cannot blame Thancred for that shitty writing. You can't blame Thancred for Shinryu. Stormblood's end was awful, and I don't really think it's Thancred's fault for that. Whoever the fuck wrote Stormblood, it's like, that's going to be forever a bad black mark on the entire series. Is going to be that. That one moment almost ruined the entire expansion for a lot of people.
And also sometimes even claimed to have been really helpful during that moment, and it wasn't for me. But Shadowbringers, and I think Ishikawa, again, excelled here by going, I kind of get that feeling too. And that's what I got from the Thancred story in Shadowbringers with Reen, is that Thancred has this baggage with Minfilia and needs some connection that is a little bit more than what we've seen through his adventures with the Scions. Ranjit is like an okay character. Not amazing, not great, more leaning towards the evil side, but we could tell with the Thancred, Reen, and the eventual resolution with Minfilia and Ranjit's involvement that something big was going to happen. The sun is setting on somebody's story. And the way they did this, and I think the biggest lesson they learned coming out of the 50-50 gameplay of Stormblood, is that the Xenos one-on-one encounters that they had were kind of crap. Xenos stomps around very slowly, you would like half and half in it. But what they did with Thancred and Ranjit was just infinitely better. The final showdown between the two. It's so excellently done, it beggars belief. Squeenix made the encounter play out that there was a very real and really stressful chance that you were just flat out going to lose, and Thancred was on his way out of Final Fantasy XIV. That mixed with like how he had grown over Shadowbringers sent Reen forward on her own despite the desperation to see Minfilia for himself. It was glorious. As the encounter played out and the odds of success are dwindling, it gave me moments to think. This is it. Thancred's dying now, and honestly, I kind of was okay with it. I went through the grief and the acceptance during the encounter, and it wasn't because I used to dislike him and I was like happy he might be leaving, but because his story had finally elevated. I cared for this character, and it had reached a somewhat satisfying resolution.
It would have been a good ending.
And I was going to be really sad to see him go. I was actually genuinely thinking to myself, I don't want him to go, but I'm okay with it. This is easily one of the best scripted encounters I've ever played.
If I had to give criticisms of Final Fantasy
Fucked,
XIV...
Chris, we're fucked. They managed to make a mountain fly into the sky, bro. How are we supposed to win?
It's totally fine, dude. Let's just build a Talos.
In the world's stupidest ideas, building a Talos that took us a month to get one working, that is this high, does not help us get to a mountain.
So we build a 300-foot Talos right up there, dude.
Oh, sure. Okay. Anything else I should do in the meantime? You want me groceries or what?
Yeah. So I think we just get everyone together from Norvrant, pickaxes, get the heart from the dwarves, quarry the stone, bam.
That would take literally a decade. That would take a decade while dipshit's up there about to kill everybody. How do you expect to do this?
It's done. It was like 5 minutes, mate.
It's true how crazy this is, I will admit.
Good job.
I never thought about it.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, so before I forget, I want to say that the only, I guess, there's a couple criticisms for Final Fantasy. It's not a beyond perfect, inflawable story, because no story that's this long is gonna have no flaws. There are some flaws, but this is the best story I've ever experienced in my life. Still, but what I wanted to say is, they should have took more liberty with character deaths. There's a lot of moments where someone dying would have been really good, and I think like that Thancred example, Thancred's death there would have been pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I think Thancred, at some point, your characters will outlive. You either die a hero or live long enough to be kind of irrelevant. You know what I mean? So I think that like a lot of characters dying off would have been better. I think that Y'shtola should have been dead a long time ago, just because of all of her reckless nature. Would deem it. It's probably something that should have happened already. I mean, I thought it was going to happen throughout the entirety of Endwalker. So
just did really well with the silliness. And it needed that because this story is so dreadfully dark and heavy that you need to keep it light. Having Volthry's big old body wiggling around the floor it's funny, despite the fact of the horror of what he's doing in Yulmore. The Chais are such wonderful, wonderful characters, and building the Talos is just crazy fun. Having the reveal of Graha finally, which was my immediate thought, but you never know until they finally reveal it, was great. I actually love Graha. I think he's a wonderful addition to the Scions. He reminds me very much of Doctor Who. He's got this aged wisdom that's trapped inside this youthful body. So he's got this old mind, but the spirit of a youth that wants to go and do things. And I think he fits perfectly into the story. And speaking of that aged mind, we should move on to Elidibus before we wrap up with Elidibus. Elidibus was shocking. Absolutely shocking. Having known people now who have lost their faculties, sadly, it hit me very, very hard how well Elidibus was written into the story. It was a little surprising, actually, while I was streaming this, is how many people didn't really resonate much with Elidibus. But
I think resonating with Elidibus is fine. I don't think that was the problem. I think most people who had a problem with it was just the fact that Elidibus had like commandeered Ardbert's body. That's probably where most people had a problem, and that's where I had a problem. I thought it was really stupid that like we let him go and do what he wanted for as long as we did, even though we knew who he was, and at that point we'd become the heroes of Novrant. I've said this a lot to chat. I've said this a lot in my friend group. The last patch, this story right here with Elidibus was fantastic, okay? But the Ardbert plot point was dumb.
For me, It was everything that I knew could happen to real people, and you see him now as the rabid dog that needs to be put down. It's true, it wasn't in your face at first with Elidibus, but to see this person who has lived for millennia and the mind has decayed, and that's what it's about. The mind has gone. Through so many lives lived, it's rotted and become decrepit, and it's not working right. And now you've got this man who is just driven at this point by pure purpose. He's a robot who has just all it's got left in its functioning servos is the basic program that it was programmed with when it was born, and lost all of that development and layers that came with it so much more. This is a guy who has sworn an oath to fulfill a task, and inside somewhere in that mind he knows that's what his purpose is, but he can't even remember swearing the oath. He doesn't remember the why of it anymore. And earlier on I called Elidibus a rabid dog. Now that's not really accurate. Elidibus isn't foaming at the mouth. He's not wild and unruly and out of control of his actions, but it's more the case that when it came to Elidibus and why I so sympathize with this character despite what that character has done, is it felt like you were taking the old rabid dog out back to be put down, and it was for his own good as well as ours. I honestly was crushed by the whole Elidibus thing.
I love that team up. So good.
Reconciliation. Elidibus. I was needed. I withdrew myself from Zodiac for them. My people. My brothers. My friends.
Aww. Aww. I was always surprised at how short Elidibus is.
Keep the faith. At duty's end, we will meet again. We will. We will. The rains have ceased, and we have been graced with another beautiful day. But you are not here to see it.
Did we ever get Elidibus's actual name? Like, do we know what Elidibus's real name is? Because we know that Elidibus is his house seat. But what is his name? If they said it, I forgot it.
Shadowbringers has so many individual set pieces of story that are utterly incredible. There's way too many to count. The little cutscenes, the little meetings, everything is great. But the pinnacle of for me is a little bit more elevated than that. What we need to talk about is how video games are not movies. They're a different medium entirely. And when that's used correctly, that's when it pushes a game to its absolute limit. When we're looking at things like what Hideo Kojima have done, a lot of people accuse him of making just movies and then slapping some gameplay in, but that's not what he does. And he's in fact very, very aware that that's not what the medium is. When they were creating PT and Silent Hills, a big conference that they had with Hideo Kojima was talking about how if we take a horror film, there's a certain aspect of the person, which would be the player, being removed from that because they get to watch the person on the screen always go through the scary door. They're going to lift up the hatch that you wouldn't do. But in video games it's different. You can put the player in the position of having to open the door, of having to turn around.
Listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, look behind you. I said, look behind you, like he was chanting some strange spell.
In Shadowbringers, they did some really good storytelling through gameplay. We saw that with Thancred. They told a story through the gameplay. They timed it so well with Ranji. And actually my best moment And I mean this. This is my pinnacle moment of Shadowbringers, is just before that final confrontation with Emmett. We're stood in Amarok, we stand around, and typically Final Fantasy XIV has the big voice-acted cutscenes. They let those very talented actors convey the emotion and the story through their talents. Now, this time they didn't do that. They decided to have you individually speak with the Scions and read and take
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
Now, obviously, the skipper's going to skip past it, but for those of us who are invested in this story and are interested in what's happening, we got to turn around and spend our time, patience, soak it in. This is the finale. This is where we've been building up for so long, and this is why this moment meant so much.
This happened
It's
at the
our
end of the game,
final
too,
moment
which is
with
nice.
the Scions, as far as we know, before we face down this incredible villain. And thankfully, and truthfully, and masterfully done by Squeenix, this was my pinnacle of Shadowbringers. Now, not every moment I've talked about here is the moments that brought me to tears. There was a few different ones, but I can't finish talking about Shadowbringers without the final moment that brought me to tears. I swore, and I mentioned this in our last video, is that if they did not resolve the Ardbert Seto situation, I was going to install the game, because it was so painful to me as a dog lover. And I'll admit, and I know many of you felt the same, the resolution to that story arc was... it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating, and I couldn't help it. I could feel it coming, and that was definitely a tearjerker
Yeah,
for
that's
me
it.
and
It
many,
didn't hit me
many
that hard.
thousands of other people who shared that experience.
Yeah, I
with
don't know
me.
why.
And that's how I felt about Shadowbringers at this point, which kind of brings us to the point where we're setting up for Endwalker and getting into that stuff, which will be next time, because genuinely, I had to take a break from playing the MSQ at this point. This is about patch 5.3. I was mentally exhausted. There was so much, and in fact, until I went back to make this video and reading through the piles of notes that we'd made during a Shadowbringers playthrough, I couldn't remember a lot of it, because it's so much that happens throughout it, and it's heavy. It's really heavy, which is why it's such a great story. It's possibly one of the only MSQ sections of FF14 I would play again, just to remember the details and the finery of it, but I'm tired. And before we even begin down the Endwalker journey, it's time for a rest. So I think you can forgive me, guys, if I take my big fat cat and I have a little rest and call it a day.
Splendid. Truly splendid.
My God.
No, I'm not ready.
Fandango.
Pardon? Very well. How can this be?
Seto, my old friend. You've grown.